Welcome back to Relationship Rescue. Today's guest is someone I've been dying to bring on, Jessica Maguire. She's not just a nervous system expert, she's a powerhouse when it comes to helping high achievers like you get out of chronic stress and into real emotional connection. If you've ever felt emotionally shut down in love, if you're constantly questioning whether it's your intuition or trauma making decisions, if you want deeper intimacy but your body feels like it's stuck in defense mode, this episode will change everything. Jessica breaks down the vagus nerve, emotional shutdown, and how to rewire your body so you can finally feel safe in love, present in intimacy, and grounded in who you are. This isn't surface level self help. This is real science, real healing, and real tools. So take a breath, drop into your body, and let's dive in. Jessica, thank you so much for being here with us today. You are a renowned physiotherapist. Say if I'm saying that right.
Physiotherapist.
Physiotherapist, a vagus nerve researcher, and author of the book The Nervous System Reset.
That's it.
Love your book.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
I love your work. I love whatever you do. I'm following your work, and I've seen you have done some amazing work for people. The nerve system, the something that we all struggle with so much. And for you to take the time and being here and educating us about our nerve system is such a pleasure to having you here.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Valerie. And the work of the nervous system applies to so many different areas, but especially in relationships.
Absolutely, absolutely. You talk a lot about the vagus nerve system. What is that, and why does it so important matters when it comes to relationship?
Mm. It's really interesting because there's a lot of great information now coming out about the vagus nerve. And I think often we think it's like one nerve that we can hack or we can just change it. We won't feel anxious anymore, which would be so fantastic if that's how it worked. But the vagus nerve is actually more like a series of connections that are interrelated. And it actually explains why our emotional and our physical and our relational health are all intertwined. So,
Mm,
if we wanted to see the anatomy of the vagus nerve, we could just think of placing one hand on the back of our head, and then there's a bony ridge there where there's a bit of where the base of our skull is. And if we went in from there, that's where the vagus nerve starts in our brainstem. And then one of the branches goes to our heart, and that helps us to cope with and recover from stress. So it slows us down afterwards. The other branch goes down to our gut and it touches almost every organ in our digestive system.
mm,
But then we have a branch that runs from our heart up to our face. And that's really involved with how we connect with other people because this branch of the vagus nerve influences our voice. So we either speak where there's connection and talking in this sing-songy voice, like I do to my daughter all the time, or we can have that voice that sounds really angry. And that's all dependent on the state that we move into of our nervous system. But also, there's that branch that it's still involved with the expression on our face, too. So,
mm.
those three parts of the vagus nerve it help to explain why we have this overlap between our emotions, our physical health, and the health of our relationships. So, our relationships really show us what's happening in our nervous system.
That explains so much that face impression is actually matters when you speak. Because a lot of people, it goes a lot over a lot of people's head, when you're talking to somebody, based on the face impression, you can see if they're like undertone anger or sadness or excitement, like you said. But I think the fascinating part is that you said one is connected to your stomach, which is all digestive, which is very, very important based on what you eat and how, and the other one is attached to your heart. So we don't pay attention to that one a lot. More people are focusing on the nervous system and, like you said, and their digestive system versus the heart one. But heart is the one that is the important one the one that is show the most emotion, and you can diagnose that how your nervous systems are regulated or not because of the heart, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can look at the way that the heart beats to see how the vagus nerve is working and the overall health of our nervous system. So we often think that the heart just beats like this regularly, like a metronome, if you like, but it actually has variation when we
Mm,
breathe in and when we breathe out. So when we breathe in, the heart typically beats faster, and when we breathe out, the heart beats slower. And that's because of the vagus nerve. So if you imagine you're on a bike and you're riding this bike downhill, you're going
right.
quite fast. So you keep a little bit of the brake with your fingers engaged, just so you didn't, hit something and go flying over the handlebars. But the vagus nerve does that to the pacemaker of our heart, which is what controls the beats. It's called the sinoatrial node. So if we have a healthy vagus nerve, we are going to see that break when we breathe in, release a little
Mm,
bit, when we breathe out, re-engage. And so we can see that variation when we take a measurement of the beats of the heart that will tell us if there's that variability between the breath in and the breath out. Now, if that's working well, we can say somebody has high vagal tone or a healthy vagus nerve. And that's been associated with better physical health, better psychological health. And in turn, we'd expect that our relationships, we would be more regulated and how we show up in those based on that as well. But what we can see following periods of chronic and traumatic stress is that for some people, it's like they're riding a bicycle downhill and the brake is already off. And
mm,
so when a challenge comes in and they have they're challenged by their partner or they're starting to date again and they're really nervous because somebody hasn't texted them back, this can turn into full anxiety. And for some people, they can become really agitated because they don't have that ability to slow themselves back down and keep that stress response in check. So, having a healthy vagus nerve is really important to how we regulate ourselves, but also how it shows up in our relationships and connections as well.
absolutely. Well, that being said, so how does the nervous system affect how we give and receive love?
So, if we think about the nervous system, we often think that it's just our nervous system inside us. But when we look at a mother and a baby, we
Mm,
know that her nervous system is directly impacting her babies. So before we're even born, there's a relational part to it. We'll be impacted by our mother's stress, or if she is in that state of regulation where she has oxytocin in her system. And it's actually, if you look at when we're born, what helps with healthy brain development and the development of our immune system is touch.
mm,
And a baby is placed on its mother or father or a caregiver straight away for that skin to skin contact. And that's when we start to see the vagus nerve develop. So when we're born, that branch of the vagus nerve that connects to our heart isn't fully developed. So we develop it through touch, through being held, through feeding, through a cooing voice, through the smiling back at us. And that technically continues to develop right through to adolescence. So we have this, it's called a biological expectation as a baby that we are going to receive those things. And if we look at the research on children who were in foster care or who were orphans who didn't receive enough touch, they have developmental delays. So we need that co-regulation coming from somebody else. And that co-regulation is really where a baby or a child borrows its parent or caregiver's nervous system and it becomes their own. So
Mm.
my daughter is a mirror to me. If I'm running around trying to do things fast, she starts getting wound up. And so she keeps, that reflection back of what I'm doing. Um, but this continues throughout our life. And I think we've come to think that it's just me and my nervous system, but
Mm.
that's not necessarily the case. There's really this way that we are impacted by other people. And it's like what you said before, Valerie, it's really when we first see somebody, those cues that we might be sending or somebody's sending to us. And a lot of the time, it's not our conscious awareness that's picking up on it. It's actually the survival brain, which is outside of our conscious awareness.
Mm.
So we might notice somebody smiles at us and it's like they smile with their eyes, and there's that real warmth coming from them. And we feel that warmth in our heart and it spreads through our body. So, this connection comes through what we call mirror neurons in our brain. And it connects to the parts of our own body that have to do, or brain and body that have to do with regulation and emotions. So it sounds like, a little bit woo woo to think that we have this way of connecting with each other to impact our nervous system, but we absolutely do. There was a study done on leaders, like a boss or a leader in an organization,
Mm.
and the people that work under the leader will start to synchronize with their heartbeats. So their physiology will change to match the leader. So
Mm.
you'd hope you have a emotionally intelligent, regulated leader, but not always the case. But it doesn't go the other way around. So the leader doesn't have that synchronization. But we certainly see it between two people, mostly, child and adult, but there is research that shows that happens with two adults as well. And so we can say that our partner or someone we're dating may be a co-regulator and bring us back towards calmness, regulation, steadiness when we're having a difficult time. But we can also have a partner or a relationship where somebody's a co-dysregulator. And when we're having a challenging time, we might both get wound up and amplified by that, which I'm sure people can relate to the experience of that happening. So um, either way, we're in this loop with other people of either coming back to regulation or moving away from it.
But that makes so much sense because, like you said, that it's emotion. So we heard of like your mood affecting mine and a relationship. Sometimes, they mirror each other. Like you said, one is in a bad mood, the other one automatically, subconsciously, by looking at the body language and face impression, and can get really in a bad mood because they're, like you said, the leader and the coworkers. So this is why how people have to see it when it comes to receiving and giving love. I love that you said as a baby, when they put the baby and the baby's close to the mother and they develop that vagus nerve. I grew up, I was the middle child. So I didn't get a lot of touching or loving from my mom. So as an adult, believe it or not, now it makes sense, so much sense that I didn't want to, when I get close to somebody, I call myself, oh, I'm a claustrophobic.
Mm,
Like I feel like, I don't want to be too close to somebody. And for the longest time I had that until I
mm,
realized that okay, that is because you're so unfamiliar in the beginning as you're developing that closeness with somebody that you actually love is okay to hug, is okay to be close to. Does that make
mm.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of good research that links that as well, where children who didn't get enough of that connection with the parent because like a sibling or like sometimes you see it with children who have siblings who are unwell, but it could be parents are dysregulated, it could be they're having a hard time. And so the child can become, it might look like hyper independent, very independent to avoid having to be disappointed or let down or not having their needs met. And so that the default response is an avoidance, but it's associated with a part of the nervous system that has to do with more rather than being anxious, it's actually more of a drop in energy where we feel like we withdraw, we isolate, we might, close down more. And I think that the way that we attach is perfectly mirrored by the states of our nervous system. So, I spoke about the person who might be anxious and need the text or need someone to answer them or need somebody else to give to them. But we can also have the people who tend to be more flat, shut down, or collapse in times of pressure, tend to withdraw, isolate, stonewall, and shut out. So I think it's really interesting for us to see those patterns and see them at play like you have, but also to know that we have this amazing capacity to change those. It's not like this is your star sign and you're it's just a learned response from likely from our childhood.
Absolutely. And that's what I was. I was like really like independent, like, I'm good. I don't need this. But once you recognize it and and it's so true, you're not that as changeable. You can actually change it and learn about it and recognize it when you get to the space of shrinking yourself.
Mm,
And then you can
mm,
always bring yourself back up and say that, okay, it's the nerve system, it's the emotional that causes the nerve system to be irregulated, to disassociate yourself from that person so much because you were raised that way. So it makes so much
exactly.
sense.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of people that might say, well, I'm an empath. Like I just pick up on other people or I'm affected by other people. And that definitely can be true. But we can also see that for people who grew up in an environment with a very um, unpredictable parent, they had to be on the lookout for bad moods or emotions or somebody going to explode. And so then they might grow up and look at their partner all the time and be like, are they okay? I can only be okay if they're okay. And so I work a lot with coaches and clinicians and health practitioners, and many of them have grown up to move into a fixer role because they don't feel safe, which is like
Mm.
to fix and rescue other people to help myself feel safe and be useful. So there's a big way, like, I mean, almost everybody who comes through our programs is relearning, you know, this pattern that I've got. Maybe I can do some work on myself as I help other people too. And I think that's the beauty of it. Like we've all got different relational strategies that we use to one, connect and be loved, and two, to feel safe.
Oh, absolutely. Because just that you're explaining to me the difference between romantic relationship and then when I had my kids, is a two different thing. But yet at the same time, like you said, you regulate yourself. Once you realize it, you're like, okay. And my kids, I was like the paranoia, like I'm so paranoid because I grew up like not getting that attention that I wanted to or I was supposed to. I was a middle child. So I got no attention. But as I grew up and had my children, I was like that paranoia parent. I want to make sure, like over smothering them, and they're like, okay, okay, okay.
I know there tends to be like a swing the other way, doesn't there? Like this overcompensation. And it's funny now because I love that we're having this conversation around like parents and children and the importance of connection and really seeing them. But my concern is we've swung so much to, being so concerned about children's feelings that parents feel like they can never get it right.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of the research was actually based on what they call good enough parenting, which means that you connect with your child as much as you can, but naturally there's going to be moments of disconnect. And it's really about as long as we repair that. It's not that we can be perfectly attuned to our children all of the time. And we would probably end up with an entitled child if we were perfectly attuned to them all the time, because it's not how the world works anyway. But
no.
I know exactly what you're saying. There is this like wanting to correct what may have been missing in our own childhood as well.
Yeah, it's all kind of stems in from, like you said, unregulated nerve system. And once you realize that, and either you're overbearing or you're disconnected. So realizing that itself is just so healthy for you and for person that is with you, whether it's a romantic relationship or your children. So now
Mm.
I know, like you said, when to back up, and also not blaming myself that I'm not always there for them, like I have to do extra work in order to be that perfect mom, because
Yeah,
the other person grows and they have their nerve system, they feel the way they feel, they develop their vagus nerves the way we don't know yet, as they grow up and see their reaction of how it is to react to that.
exactly. Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So why do some people shut down emotionally during conflict, when it comes to relationship?
Mm. It's a really good question. We could go back to childhood, like we were talking about, where we can see there can be the pattern of a child who um, may have had a parent who was a little bit inconsistent. They were not predictable with their connection, or the parent was quite wound up. So the child will pick up on that energy of, or the what we're saying, the synchronization, and they tend to be more anxious and need that connection. They likely didn't get consistent connection. But from what we were speaking about, I think where we have a parent that's more absent, or there's just not that emotional consistency there, it's really missing. That's where we'll see children who tend to close down because they're scared. It's almost like I'm going to shut down before I can be rejected.
Mm.
And so what it might look like is if they've been in an environment that was highly stressful, like there was a time of traumatic stress in a household from parents that were not safe, or it could have been an event like a disaster, or a death in the family, or something along those lines, then the response can be that the child has had, so much anxiety and mobilization that then their nervous system goes to what we call the dorsal vagal state. So, what tends to happen for all of us is when we're stressed, the first thing that happens is the vagus nerve releases that brake on our heart, and we have this mobilizing energy come in. And that's what we might call stress, but it's really our nervous system mobilizing energy to meet demands. If we're whatever it is we're facing, or threats, and that's a good thing.
Mhm.
Now, a lot of the time we can recover fully from that, and there's no damage, so it's not like that kind of stress is bad. That's a mobilization. But when the stressor continues and we can't deal with it with this heightened energy, the nervous system will then move towards an collapse or an immobilization. And that, in a really dangerous situation, actually protects us from feeling physical pain. We
Mm.
dissociate, we tune out, but also psychological pain as well. So, particularly in a life-threatening situation, if somebody's in a situation with abuse, or where they're going to face something really painful, that's what can happen through the nervous system. So, some people may have found that if they grew up in an abusive environment, their response today is that dorsal vagal shutdown collapse. And
Mm.
so, whenever there's conflict as an adult, which means that there could be no threat, it could just be a partner that's angry at them, they go into this collapse state and shut down
State.
and can't speak. So that can be really hard for both people in a relationship like that. But on a lesser extent, for people who tend to be more avoidant, I think they probably got disappointed and felt like they were in a bit of an emotional desert growing up, and learnt not that they couldn't rely on somebody else to be with them when they were having difficult times. So they may have learnt to cut off from those sensations themselves because they didn't have an adult to help them navigate what was happening in really challenging situations. And then today, that might be that default is just to cut off, avoid, and not connect. So it's more on the higher stressful end, where we might see neglect, abuse, like we said, we might see that there's more people who tend to be anxious. But again, as we said, definitely something that we can rewire through a corrective relationship where there's secure attachment and we feel safe.
I was just going to say, so how can we regulate those emotion and make it available to, let's just say, whether it's from childhood or from a bad experience in a past relationship?
Mm,
Because, either people get it, like you said, from childhood, but sometimes adults going after a bunch of relationship, they still have that within them. So how would you rewire that?
mm. It's a really interesting question, Valerie, because a lot of people will say that they repeat the same pattern as
Yeah.
they become adults from what formed in their childhood. So they might find that if they had a parent who was wound up or anxious, that's who they then go into the relationship with and have the same thing. So, what we would say for the people who tend to be more anxious and wound up, part of this is learning how you can find safety in yourself. So there's more self regulation rather than focusing so much on people outside of you for that safety.
Mhm.
Not always easy, but this is really learning, okay, such and such hasn't texted me back. I feel this tension in my body. I can feel I'm agitated. I can't relax. I've heard from some students who they'll take a sleeping tablet and go lay down because they're so agitated by somebody not getting back to them. So this is really looking at, well, how do we bring ourselves back to regulation from that mobilized state? For some people, this might look like using movement. So it's like, well, I've got all this energy. I need to go for a fast walk and let some of this mobilization out. And that's a really healthy thing. Get your heart rate up, discharge the glucose that your stress hormones have released into the body. Then, one of the best things we can do is use our breathing with a really long exhalation to bring that vagal brake in, the part of the vagus nerve connecting to our heart, and slow ourselves back down. A lot of this might feel like we need to soothe ourselves through touch. There's that part that is innate in us where we might use touch on our own body to be like, I'm with you and you're safe.
Mhm.
Because a lot of the time, who we might be speaking to, the part of ourself, is that younger self that's looking for that connection outside. So, soothing with touch can be a really beautiful way to bring ourselves back down. Now, for the person who tends to avoid, disconnect, stonewall, isolate, the best thing is to try to reach out to others in this time.
Mhm.
So, in that state, there'll often be a feeling of not belonging, of shame, of feeling like you're alone in a dark room. And so for some people, it might just be start by texting someone, sending someone a DM, a friend, and just being, hey, I'm feeling really alone and having a conversation. But then over time, as we have this sense of more energy and feeling like we're coming out of that place, going
Mhm.
into our community, whether that's getting a coffee and saying hello to a barista and sharing a smile where you feel that warmth and connection and belonging, or even just being in a place where there's a lot of people, it doesn't mean you need to talk to people and tell them your story. It could just be being at the beach or the park or somewhere where there's lots of people and you feel that sense of being around others. So
Mhm.
for that person, they do want to reach out rather than being stuck inside by themselves. It's really to reach out to others. So they're opposite, really, of the way they would use that to help their nervous system.
Yeah, because the words that keep getting repeated with us that we get a lot of email and people are sending to me is like, nobody understands me.
Mm,
Nobody understands me. Like they feel alone.
mm,
Like I'm going through this. I talk to people, nobody understands me. And like you said there, and it's so funny you said that about sleeping pill. I've had people that are actually saying that the only time I'm okay when they go through breakup or when they have problem in a relationship, they sleep. because that's the
Mm.
only time your mind is quiet and you're not thinking about the conflict or you're not thinking about what do I have to do next in order to fix the relationship and forgetting about themselves. But I think those strategies are really good to either get it out of your system, that energy, so you don't have to be anxious, or just being with yourself and reminding yourself that you're okay, you're not alone.
Yes,
Teach
exactly.
child
I
of
think
yourself.
that, yeah, and there's so much in when we listen to what people are saying that will reflect the state that they're in. So we actually say story follows state. And I think this speaks to how much we think, well, if I think differently about it, if I just can change my mindset, if I can just be more positive, then I'll feel better. But it's the other way around. It's like what's happening in our nervous system, like being in that dorsal vagal state, is creating a story that you're alone, that no one understands you, that you're disconnected, that you're going to be alone forever. I remember, after having some breakups and feeling that sense of like, there is seriously something wrong with me. Like, why do I keep having these relationships that, I keep failing at? And it was that story of shame, of, I've got something wrong with me. That's why this relationship ended. But when we're going through a breakup and we have all these big, strong emotions that are going through our body, they're traveling up to the brain via the vagus nerve. And the brain wants to make sense of them and put them in like a little box. So it creates a story like that, well, I'm alone. There's something wrong with me. Everybody else is in relationships and I'm not. And so a lot of what we need to do is undo those stories and have a look at them. But also start with our nervous system first and then see how that story changes.
I love that. I love that because the story is what matters. I remember that in one of you said that if you, I believe you said that somebody lost the function of their hand, and for you to rewire their brain to get the function, but you give them the stories that how important that is to you. Not so much the hand functioning, but what is beyond the function of the hand is the story you give yourself.
Mm,
And I think it's the same thing when it comes to relationship. And I say that to my clients all the time. At the moment you're getting so either aggressive or anxious or sad or mad, is what is story you giving yourself?
mm,
The
mm.
story that you're telling yourself, which causes a lot of emotion and mess up with your nerve system. And eventually
Yeah.
you see it physically that once the nerve system get messed up, then we'll talk about the physical level of that, which is be a stress. So like, how does chronic stress impact intimacy and connection in a relationship?
Mm. It's really interesting when we are talking about this as like the mobilized person is being more anxious. It's a little bit like they're stuck with the on button jammed on. And so no matter what they do, they can't switch off, they can't relax. And it might show up in their physical health where they can't sleep. So insomnia is really common in this state. Um, and so we might hear them say, well, I can't get to sleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm wide awake. We might see this impact people's gut because the motility or the movement of food through the digestive system slows down when we have this mobilization. And so it creates bloating and pain. We might develop like sensitivities to food. And for people who have old injuries, they might have more physical pain too, because it links to inflammation. But what we might see with somebody who is in this sympathetic nervous system state, where there's that mobilized anxiety, is like you said, there can be anger or aggression. So we might find ourselves, in order to get a connection with somebody who feels distant to us, we might start arguments with them. We might start picking at them, like, why haven't you done this? Why is this always like this? You never are there for me. You can feel that reactivity to get a connection back. So that could be with our spouse, but it could also be online. We see people get really worked up in the comment section of some posts. And I think for a lot of people, there is this agitation there. We might find ourselves really like acting out in a way where we storm off or we slam doors, or we have like those little agitation tantrums. But definitely more the criticism, the blame, and the acting out. Now, for the in the other way, we've spoken about this a little bit, where if we're down in that dorsal vagal state where there's a flatness, a depression, this might show up in our relationships more, where we find ourselves stonewalling. So people are texting us and we're just like, I'm not even replying. I give up. I'm not even gonna give that a go. Or people invite us to things like our friends, and we're like, nah, I'm fine. We might see our inbox of messages and just be like, oh, I can't even look at that. I can't even deal with that. Just get that away. And so there is that definitely that story, like you were saying as well, Valerie, around I'm alone. I think there's a big part of this, of what I've heard, is like, people might put themselves out there on dating apps and they have an experience that wasn't what they were expecting, as it happens with dating apps. But then there's this whole part of like, I'm not doing that anymore. I give up on dating altogether, and then it's really sad because the story wins out, because we say that, well, that's just going to be more pain. That's just going to be more disappointment. People always let me down. And I think this is where we might see what's happening today is potentially rehashed from something when we were younger that feels the same. So let's say, Valerie, if you're talking about your didn't want to be close to anyone, you had that sense like my parents weren't there for me as I needed emotionally, and your partner today, let's say they didn't show up for you in a time when you wanted them to, you could be disappointed at today, my partner didn't do this, or you spiral down into that old story
Mhm.
of this is my whole life story. This is how my world is. And the difference in that actually has to do with these memories that are outside of our conscious awareness that we store from when we're very young. And if we don't heal that, they continue to play out because our brain operates as a prediction machine. It predicts the future based on our past experiences and the sensations that we have. Now, if the sensations that we have today feel slightly similar, doesn't need to be exactly the same, our brain will say, oh, this is just like the time my parents weren't there for me. I'm going to have a reaction throughout my whole body and brain that responds to how it was back then. So we feel helpless, hopeless. We hear those thoughts of it's always going to be a failure. I'm not dating at all anymore. People are never there for me. I'll always be let down. So our ability to come back to the present really relies on being able to come back to a regulation, bring ourselves back to a state where we feel more grounded, more calm, so we can see things as they really are, not the past playing out. And then when we have a new experience where you might say, okay, well, no, my partner wasn't there for me today. They're human, they're not going to get it perfect all the time. I'm going to have a conversation with them about that today. That is a corrective experience where your brain will update those predictions based on how that all plays out, and that will change how you predict the future.
It makes so much sense because the dangerous part of that is with, like you said, when we something happened to us and we think about our past and that story comes in and the brain stored that information and it's just a comfort zone. You feel so comfortable with that feeling because you had it for so long. You're so familiar with it. And you're like, okay, I'm in a way home. And that becomes your comfort zone. That's what we have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could not agree more. And I think when we have a new experience, it is uncomfortable. It has to be uncomfortable because that uncomfortableness stops, it's like it short circuits the prediction. So we want to step into those moments that are uncomfortable for us, where it's like, okay, I don't know if this is today or if it's from my past, and I'm going to have this conversation with my partner, which might be scary to have, and I want to do it in a way where I can be as present as I can. Might not be perfect. That's a hard thing to do, but that is where change lies, rather than this automatic belief of the familiar. And I think that's what we cling to the familiar.
Absolutely. For the longest time. And it's so fascinating that how something can happen in a childhood in a very young age. And then 20 years later, 30 years later, if similar situation happen or the word that somebody says that triggers you, you go back to the same feeling. And it's like,
Yes.
it's freaking 20 years later, you know? And yet the brain represented as so like, you know, this word, you've been through this. It's
Mm,
okay, you know? And then we
mm.
accept that and we add it to the stories and okay, yeah, that's me. That's just me. I'm like that. And it becomes
Yes.
our personality.
Oh, 100%. And if it's something that happened in our childhood, that will be even more the case, because a lot of the time these big emotions and sensations are happening before we have the language to understand what's actually really going on. And so all that information in our bodies when we're really little just gets stored for when we're older. And it doesn't make sense because we haven't had, if no one's talking us through that as an adult, it doesn't quite make sense. When I was 4, my mum hurt her back really bad. And I remember playing in my room and hearing her scream. And I ran out, and she was, curled up in a ball on the floor screaming. And I had to call the ambulance, which was like climbing up onto a stool and getting the phone and
Mm.
calling. And everyone, when the ambulance came and got her, but everyone told me, "Oh, you were so brave, you did so great." And I actually grew up as an adult treating people with lower back pain. That's what happened. So the subconscious played out in that way. And I always felt over responsible for fixing people. So it took me years to unlearn that, but I still need to watch that pattern that can creep back in if I'm highly stressed. So I think it's really about the awareness that we have and the tools that we have it's not that we can never have these patterns again, but we can learn to see it playing out in our relationships. For me, if I saw myself thinking I needed to rescue everyone or fix everyone, and I can recognize that, I now see it and have the tools to say, let other people be responsible for that. And my husband has even said that to me. He's like, you need
I
to
was gonna
let
say, especially now,
responsible.
especially now that you're a mom, you know, it's just like I can imagine how it creeps out back to you. But you went through a lot of trauma in your life, not just your mom, your two brothers. And how did you cope with that? And can you tell us, share a little bit if you feel comfortable?
Of course, yes, of course. So shortly before that time when I called the ambulance for my mum, and probably what really added to the fear for me as a 4-year-old was I lost my younger brother, probably 6 months before that, I'm going to say. So he died of sudden infant death syndrome. And my parents were great in that we spoke about it. We had a birthday cake for Luke when it was his birthday to still honor him, but there just wasn't the support available that you would have today back then. Now I'm 40, so it was a long time ago. And
Mhm.
so whilst I cognitively knew it was part of what had happened in my life, when I got to 34, sorry, my older brother, Sam, died by suicide. And you can imagine not only for the pain I felt for my parents, but the memories that came up from not just, what I was experiencing then. I also had all the grief from Luke's death come up as well. And I really was pushed into dysregulation. I was swinging up to those highs of anxieties, down to the lows
Mm.
of like there were days where I could not get up off the couch, and I was so shocked by that. Like my friends were inviting me out to a, I think it was a boxing, like a day after Christmas party. And I tried with all of my willpower to get up and go, and I just couldn't do it. So I really learnt about the nervous system at that time for myself personally, but it was actually 3 weeks after Sam died. I'd been planning to take this year off and go and study the nervous system. So prior to Sam dying, I had my own clinic and I was treating patients. I had a whole team, but I always felt like there was this piece missing that had to do with the connection between physical and emotional health and relational health. And so I decided to go and study for a year, and then Sam died, and I still went and did that by myself, which, sometimes that was really hard, but also it was what's allowed me today to walk the talk. And it's my, in like behind everything that I do with my work, it's to support people who have been in that suffering because I know what it feels like, but also to support other practitioners who um, may have gone through something and they feel really called now to support other people. So, really challenging time. I just feel that I was lucky in the way that was going in to learn all of the things about how to build regulation and how to bring the nervous system back to a healthy place, because we spoke about how the nervous system changes, and like you saw that video where I was talking about people who've had a stroke, when we go through a big traumatic event and there's a lot of shock, and we get these changes in our nervous system. So for me, what I was explaining, for some people that lasts for years, because we think time heals, but that's not necessarily the case. It's actually the experiences that we have change our nervous system. They're changing them. It's changing it every day. We're always changing from what we experience. And so the ability for us to play a role in healing our own nervous system from things that have, like me, happened when we were a child or happened as an adult. We have this ability to come back to regulation. And it took me a long time to be ready for dating again, particularly after Sam's death. And then I met my husband, and I did a lot of work that had this feeling like the other shoe was going to drop, something bad was going to happen. So I did a lot of work on helping with changing that, because that was my brain predicting, like, you've just had this bad thing happen, something else will go wrong. And so it really speaks to the ability we have to change our nervous system. And I'm so grateful for it, because there were times in that relationship where I wanted to run away because I was scared, not of, my husband's a very steady, calm person, but it was the feeling of closeness with somebody after having such a big shock again. But through doing a lot of work on myself, I managed to change that. And now I'm a mother, and I have a beautiful marriage, and I'm so grateful for having that, learn those skills to change my nervous system.
Oh, yeah. And grief is the hardest thing to grieve because a lot of time in the beginning it's acceptable. People, when you grieve, when you're in the down part of your side and you're so feeling down, it just people like, oh, you're grieving, somebody died, it's okay. And I'm glad that you mentioned the time some people can take a longer time. I actually learned that one person I saw on a podcast that he had a lot of physical problem, a lot of pain in his body and things like that, because he was like kind of continuing with his mother grief
Mm,
after 5 years.
mm,
And the therapist was saying that it's okay to grieve, but I think it's just too long you're holding on to that story, into that sadness is now that's affecting your body.
mm,
So for me, my first child died when he was 3 months old. So I was a really young mom, very, very young. I didn't know nothing much about being a mother or anything like that. So it's funny that you said that when it comes to that, either you were young when you dealt with that, and we didn't have the tool as we do now. But for me, I shut down. I was so young. Jessica, I was literally like closet. I was just like never happened. I was in such a denial for a longest time until my first daughter after him born. And then I was just like you, because of that experience, I was thinking that, oh my God, what if something bad happened? And I had to reprogram my nerve system and my process of thinking and giving myself this story of no, that's not how it's working. So I really grieved 20 years later
Mm.
because at first I was so in such a denial, I just put it aside. I was upset, but then that's it. I didn't talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I don't want to mention it. But then later on, I learned that, okay, this is not good for you. And I went through a lot of other bad relationship because I was holding on to that.
Mm. I'm sorry for your loss. That would be incredibly hard to
I'm
lose a
sorry for
baby.
yours too.
Thank you.
Yeah. But no, it's so important for us. Like, I'm glad you mentioned that it's good to grieve. It's good to go through all that thing, but you have to be aware of it that don't do it for too long.
I think what I love about nervous system work as a way to understand something like loss that's, a profound loss, is that we need to let what's happening in our nervous system move through us. And sometimes that's like, with our crying, we are letting that move through us. Our diaphragm shakes, our body moves, our face moves. But what we are being taught about grief, if we look at like the different stages of grief that was once taught, is that it's some kind of step by step linear thing. And it's not. Some days we will be angry, some days we will be collapsed, some days we'll want to shut everybody out. And I think there's an ability that we need to have to recognize what's coming, because it comes in these waves, huge waves to process, and then to be able to let that almost move through us. Like it needs an ability to come through our body. When people don't, that is where we see that people have this longer struggle, and it plays out in different ways. I've seen a lot of people's physical health impacted by that. So rather than looking at grief as, something that needs X amount of time, I think it's really how do we start to let this move through us? And if that, my Sam died 8 years ago, and I still get sad on his birthday. I still get sad on his anniversary or Christmas, but it doesn't dysregulate me anymore.
Mm,
But what I see for a lot of people is it's not actually the grief anymore, it's the ongoing dysregulation of their nervous system, thinking something bad's going to happen.
yeah.
And I think we don't need to say, you shouldn't feel sad or you shouldn't cry or you shouldn't have any of that. But we are, we don't need to suffer. We don't need to have that extra dysregulation on top of that, that really creates anxiety, depression, shut down, where we can't get up off the couch, where we isolate ourselves either. I think they're two different things.
One of the things that helped me a lot, and I want to know your opinion on that, was breath work. I know
Mhm.
that breath work regulates your nerve system. Is that something people should do to, I mean, just to regulate all the time to get used to that regulation? So when something does happen, it's much easier to handle it versus not.
Yeah, it can be great and really useful. It's just making sure that the breathing, the resources we use match where we're at. So
Okay.
I mentioned before, for somebody who's anxious, a longer exhalation can be great. For somebody who's shut down and collapsed, a longer exhalation will make them feel more shut down and collapsed. But we kind of are using it as a blanket statement for everybody to do breath work. And I think there's better resources for people who might panic. So if we get somebody who panics a lot to pay attention to their breath, it can amplify the panic because they already feel breath hunger or air hunger. So
Mm,
it's really looking at who we use it with, when, and what state they're in,
okay.
as to how we would apply it.
Is there a case that you apply breath work? to calm them down?
Yeah, so for somebody who might be feeling some anxiety, we can look at using like that a breath in for it could be 4 seconds and a breath out for 8 seconds. As long as they can stay, their body stays soft and relaxed, and there's no sort of breathing with it, creating all that tension as well. But it wouldn't be what I'd start with. I'd start with getting them more resourced before starting with breath work.
I'm so glad you said it because I could tell you right now, a lot of listeners are listening and they're like, "Oh, thank God that she said that," because a lot of time, people just say to you like, calm down and breathe. And like you said, if you have anxiety, you're like, "I'm stuck. I don't want to breathe. I'm already breathing so loud. I'm already
Yeah.
breathing so fast." So you're amplifying that even more. But no, that is so true. So based on what scenario you're going through, so breathwork is not always the answer. So I'm glad that you clarified that. Because we
Yeah.
hear it so many places, like you have to meditate, you have to breathe, you have to meditate,
Mm.
which in that some cases is good, but a lot of cases people ask me like, it's not working for me. So I'm glad
Yeah,
that you
I think
clarified.
it's really about what we want to look at with any nervous system work is it depends on your state first, and then we want to look at it personalized. This is like using things that will change the brain and body. We're not going to have one thing that works for everybody. As nice as that would be, it doesn't work quite that way.
So I'm gonna give you example of something. You tell me what would you do in your practice to calm them down if two couples are in urge of fighting with each other and getting to this argument. What is some things they can do to calm their nerve system? I had asked somebody and they said meditate or breath work, but I'm like, I'm about to burst out and scream and yell and stuff. I'm not gonna go to the other room
No,
and say, hold
no.
on, let me go meditate and come back and then we're gonna fight. What would your
Yeah.
advice would be to kind of calm our nerve system and to just pause or at least not get to that high conflict just because.
Yeah, so the best thing would be if there was agitation and it was like almost turning into anger or aggression. I would let the body move. Each person separate, go and do something that allows that body to move and express anger. It's like when someone's angry or when you feel that, "Ugh," what do you want to do? You want to put your hands in fists, you want to make your body contract, you want to grit your teeth. That's the body wanting to express that mobilization. Let it do that away from your partner. Once you've let that mobilization move, then come back and start again.
Time out. Time out. Time out. Just walk away. It's okay to walk away from the argument and then come back to it.
Of course.
How can you tell the difference between your intuition and the trauma respond?
It'll be for something that's traumatic, it's going to be a
Yes.
lot louder, a lot more activating. Your intuition is quieter, gentler, and more subtle.
And no, most of the time we should listen to our intuition. That's what I hear.
If we can, I think the challenge is that we need to do a lot of regulating to get to the place to listen to our intuition first.
So, what are some signs that people come to you that they feel like their nerve systems are not regulated and they need help?
So I think the best way to understand it is how I was saying before, they can either be the on buttons jammed or the off buttons jammed. So for the on buttons jammed, anxiety, agitation, aggression, panic, or they can't sleep, they've got gut issues, there's pain, their reactivity in relationships, criticizing, blaming, storming off. Or the other way is they feel flat, emotionally numb, they have extreme procrastination, foggy. It's in that case, there can still be digestive issues, but they feel exhausted, like a chronic fatigue or burnout. And in relationships, it's that stonewalling, cutting off, and isolating. So it's usually either one of those presentations of stuck on or stuck on off.
Or as long as that, yeah, you get that signal that knowing that, because sometimes it could be chronic. You keep doing it and you're not
Yeah.
aware of it becoming you. So that's why I ask you this question because I want our listeners to understand when you feel that way almost all the time, or even 70% of the time, then that's the time to say to ourselves that we need help.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what I've seen is those who are tend to be more cut off don't even know that they're in that state because they've disconnected from their body so much. It's like just being in a numbness. So I think when we start people, like people come back to our programs and they connect with their body, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm always flat. I'm always shut down. I'm always have no energy. And I think that's a big light bulb moment for a lot of people.
And what does that neutral state feels like or sound like?
So for regulation, people would describe that more as being connected to themselves, connected to others, connected to the world, but they feel flexible, more adaptable, their thoughts are coherent, and their energy is stable.
That's the key. The energy is stable. I feel that all the time. So I'm like, okay, I'm good as long as the thing. Before I let you go, what is one thing every couple should know about the nervous system and love?
Hmm. I think we often think the best thing is about how we give, to others, but our own regulated nervous system is the best gift that we can give to somebody else, especially when they're having a difficult time. So, really looking at how we can build our own regulation is what's going to support our partner because we'll be sending them messages of safety and warmth, helping them come back into safety, warmth, connection. And I think that's really the grounds that love thrives in is when we're in regulation.
Perfectly said. Because you recognize that you love yourself. You can't give from an empty space. So
Mm.
knowing that you love yourself and giving to others, I think that's what makes it so beautiful.
Exactly. Yes. Couldn't agree more.
Jessica, thank you so much for being here and sharing this amazing information with us. And I'm sure our listeners gonna listen to this and pick up a lot of little things that we take for granted.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much for having me, Valerie.